All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'd like to commence our formal proceedings this morning by acknowledging the Gadigal and Bidjigal people as the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which the webinar is taking place today. But as this is a webinar, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands from which you'll join us today. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and recognise their cultural and spiritual relationships with the lands, waters, and seas. It is our privilege to learn from their rich contributions to both society and science as we work towards finding more effective ways to help all children with cancer. And I extend that same respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and colleagues here today. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have your support and participation. I'm not going to waste any more time, but I would like to warmly welcome Dr. Angelica Lau, who's our Zero Program Coordinator and scientific officer, and also Dr. Mitali Manzur, who is our Zero Program Manager, who are speaking today on data access for Zero. Angelica obtained her PhD in 2019 and worked as an immunology postdoc at the Garvan. And she has previously been a counsellor of the Australian New Zealand Society for Immunology, or ASI for short. And she's currently the Special Interest Group Coordinator for ASI. So she remains very involved in her research community. But in May 22, she took a step into the research management space, joining Zero, and supports the program in the delivery and expansion. Mitali completed her PhD in 2007 before going on to postdoc at the Harry Perkins Institute, and that's in Perth. And after completing her MBA in 2017, she also took that step into research management with a program manager role for the Precision Health at Telethon Kids Institute in Perth. And in 2020, Mitali joined us as the program manager for Zero. So without further ado, I am handing over to Angelica and Mitali to share with you today the access processes and procedures and charters for accessing Zero's data and samples for your research. Over to you.
Thank you, Ness. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. I can't see any of you, so please feel free to interrupt if I suddenly freeze or something.
Yeah, the slide's good, Mitali.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We're just going to take you through our newly revamped, refreshed data access process. Yeah. So it's certainly been quite the journey for Zero since the first pilot study target back in 2015, which was throughout for kids in New South Wales, and then the national PRISM trial for high-risk patients, and then finally the 02 trial last year, which for the first time in this country provided access to precision medicine for all children diagnosed with cancer. We officially launched 02 in February last year, and by April of 2023, we had over 1,000 patients in our cohort and approximately 1 petabyte of data to look after already. At that time, we were enrolling about 25 patients a month, and that was with just one site open and only CNS tumors enrolling in 02. The high-risk tumors will, of course, continue to enroll. And by December of 2023, we had already doubled our enrollments to 50 patients a month. Between December 23 and February 24, we're averaging about 70 patients a month. And if we keep tracking at that rate by the end of the project period, which is June 2025, we will have more than 2,200 patients within our cohort, and that's equivalent to about 2.5 petabytes of data. It's really incredible, and despite our initial lag in opening for the first 2 years, if we keep tracking at this rate, we're on track to enroll 93% of our initial enrollment target, which is truly incredible. So I guess it's an unprecedented level of expansion, and a crucial enabler for this rapid ramp up is a sophisticated data ecosystem that can really support both this volume and velocity of data generation for our entire pipeline. So starting from our patient enrollments to receiving and processing and tracking our data samples, to, of course, the genomic analysis using high-powered analytics and customized platforms. Finally, the data interrogation within the MTB before our report is produced, all with the aim of finding the best treatment pathway for each patient that comes across our program. So this is really quite a beast. And in addition to the impact that we're having on patient lives, what we also have is this incredibly vast data set that's rich and unique, ranging from clinical data to genomic data, biological models, biospecimens from patients. Throughout towards the end of PRISM and 02, we have multiple patients with multiple samples within our cohort as well. So all of this amazing resource is basically under the custodianship of CCI. So it is our responsibility, to the best of our ability, to prevent the re-identification of this data, any non-compliance in the use of this data, and of course, protect from any external threats such as malware or data breaches. So CCI has a legal responsibility to ensure that this data set is managed appropriately through the Zero program. And to really highlight the beast that we're dealing with here, Helen from our head of legal put together this schematic which maps out our data flow amongst all the relevant parties, overlaid with our contractual and legal obligations. So in the red lines, you'll see that's our most sensitive data, and that's very much restricted to the clinical realm. The green lines represent the de-identified data that, of course, we share with AGRF, our sequencing provider, also with our researchers through collaborations and any data repositories that we wish to deposit the data in, and also in publications. And then, but of course, we have legal and contractual obligations with our funders, also our trial sponsor, and of course, the ethics committees around the country. So this, so just to really stress the point that as a legal entity, that the zero data and samples are collected, CCI is responsible for this managed data asset, which means that there's sensitive information that's being collected, and we must be bound and respectful of all patient privacy at all times. Unlike raw data, the other aspect is that there is a factor of IP that needs to be factored in as well before entering into any contractual obligations. So any unauthorized access or misuse of the zero data is going to result in some serious legal liabilities and a breach, obviously, of our research integrity obligations. And I just wanted to stress that point. So taking all of that into consideration, we developed a new data and sample access policy, guided by both the Global Alliance for Genomic Health and the NHMRC. The 5 guiding principles, which really form the foundation of all of our downstream activities, I just want to highlight here today. So one, obviously the first thing is to maintain procedural fairness and transparency. All of the data applicable must be treated fairly. The data must be accessible so that we can actually advance the research and scientific knowledge. We must be respectful of the reasonable expectations of data and sample producers and research participants. One of the biggest differences for 02 is we are now collecting ethnicity data. So any cultural factors will also need to be taken into consideration when sharing data sets for different communities and populations. We must provide clarity on the use of the data and preserve its and make sure it's within the realms of ethical research, of course. And this is tied closely to the fifth principle, which is, of course, to ensure that all approvals for access and to data and samples are in accordance with the applicable patient consent forms and ethics approvals. So these 5 principles really were the pillars which the rest of our processes were built on and informed by. So I just want to draw your attention to this article I came across, not while I was putting this slide deck together in my free time, of course, don't worry, Ness. It really struck a chord with me, and basically it describes how this concept of purposeful stupidity and the fact that excessive bureaucracy and long, arduous, opaque processes can really bring down an organization to the point where the CIA actually uses as a tactic and would plant individuals in organizations to obstruct and slow processes down. And I share this with you all today because we appreciate that purposeful stupidity is not going to help anyone. And our intentions in developing and implementing these processes was definitely not to slow things down, but it was primarily to spark research and make sure that our legal and ethical obligations are met. And I hope you have a deeper understanding of that today. So on that note, to actually take you through the details of the process itself, I'm going to flick to Angelica, who will outline the exact process for you today.
Thanks, Mitali. Hi, everyone. So thank you, Mitali, for a great background, and I hope that really helps emphasize why we now have this newly established data access committee to help guide us in the right way to ensure that all requests for data and samples through Zero do meet the ethical and legal obligations for us as the custodian of this resource. Next page, please. Mitali. Next slide. Thanks. So the newly established Data Access Committee will be working together with CCI as the custodian to oversee the access to the comprehensive multi-omics, molecular and phenotypic data, as well as the clinical data and biospecimen that's for further research beyond their primary use in the clinical studies under the Zero program. So this requirement is outlined in the patient consent to ensure that any users or on share of these resources are in fact in alignment with patient consent to meet our legal obligations. And as a national program, our Nearly Data Access Committee is composed of national representatives from our National Study Committee as well as the Zero Research Committee, and as the voting scientific panel to help us gauge the appropriateness of the project in which the application is requesting the data or samples for. And the full charter, or that outlines the responsibility of the Zero DAC, can actually be accessed via our newly updated Zero Data and Sample Resources webpage, linked here. And so just to introduce you, in our Data Access Committee, we have two categories of members: the non-voting members, including our DAC chair, which are primarily DAC chair, the clinical data coordinator, myself as program coordinator, as well as our CCI Tumor Bank rep, who are really crucial in managing the operational side of these type of requests and transfers. And also, as I mentioned, the voting members consist of our National Study Committee and Research Committee representatives to provide us with the scientific expertise to enable us to make sure that each request come through do in fact meet the expectations of data or sample use. Next page, please. And to help you understand the type of applications that we actually do receive for our program, it can broadly be categorized into 3 types. Firstly, of course, as the Australia's first precision medicine program delivering on the 0 to clinical trial, we have an obligation to deliver and provide the sample and data for clinical purpose. And so we do receive requests from treating clinicians under the 0 to trial and other trial studies to request for data and sample. And these are through a letter of request and justification and subsequent release form and filling in the release form as well as approval from our program and study chair. But we also have received requests from parents, guardians, and patient participants who sometimes do want to request for their own raw data. And we as a program are also obligated to do so because ultimately this data is the source of this data do belong to the patient. And this also comes through a similar process via the consent and the release. And so this section of the data sample requests do still go through the data access committee for noting. However, as this fulfills the clinical obligation of our program, these will be expedited and to initiate the data and material transfer ad hoc. However, for the purpose of this talk, focusing on the research purpose in which our data and samples are being shared, this would include applicants, including research collaborators with existing or pending research agreements with CCI, as well as any other researchers that are both internal in CCI or any externals within our network, and any other institutions or registry who would like to access the Ciro's data and samples for future research. And these categories of applicants must submit requests through the Ciro sample and data access application form, which really outlines the intention as well as any project details, the inclusion of any supporting documents to help the DAC understand why it is that you're requesting this data for your research. And of course, also any future amendments, including changes in personnel, changes in project scope, or any additional requests for data or samples for already approved projects can be submitted through the amendment request. And so I guess, the main point of this slide really is to show you that regardless what type of applications that come through, they will all go through the Ciro Data Access Committee as the overseer governance to really help provide the decision and guidance to ensure that we are sharing this data and sample appropriately as per our obligations. Next page. Thanks, Mitali. And so to introduce you to our process, we have now opted in for a 4-week from round close to outcome turnaround for our sample and data application. And this process will be performed in a monthly basis. We have a monthly data access committee review rounds. So typical applications, we will have a turnaround within 4 weeks of round closing. And you'll be provided as the applicant a very clearly defined criteria for the application assessment. And also in the sample and data access application form, we'll have clearly guided sections to aid you through the details that are required to enable our data access committee to assess the nature of your request and also to ensure that all the ethical and legal obligations are being met by your application. And all of these are in fact published on our Ciro website, which I'll introduce to you shortly, to really enable the transparency in the data and sample availability and also the reason for decisions in which you receive as an applicant. And so just to quickly walk you through this process, here you as the applicant can submit your data access or sample access form to the Ciro DAC. and it will undergo 3 stages of review. Firstly, stage 1 is the eligibility and validation checks, which primarily looks at any supporting ethics letters, any exemptions, as well as ensuring that you've completed all the fields of your form, and to ensure that your request for the data and sample does in fact fit in with what is being approved by the ethical letters that you've provided. And after that is stage 2, which the applications will then be forwarded to our scientific committee, who will perform the project review based on the project content and the justification of the data or sample asked for that particular project. And after 2 weeks, we will then have the DAC monthly meeting where decisions will be made. And you can expect then by week 5, you receive an outcome of your application, which if there are no concerns or no issues raised by the committee, then it will automatically initiate or commence the agreement and sharing process. We do note that because we do need to keep track of how our data and sample are being used once it has left the CIRO repository. And so applicants are also required to submit annual progress to enable us to understand that the data or sample has been used in the appropriate way. Next. So beyond all that scramble, and thanks for bearing with me, I hope that it will become easy for you to actually understand how to navigate and request for access to CIRO data and samples, which is simplified in 4 simple steps. Firstly is to please visit our CIRO data and sample homepage, the link you can find here. And step 2 is to navigate from this homepage the various specific types of requests that you may have. So for CIRO data, you go to access CIRO data. For CIRO sample, you go to access CIRO sample. And for any amendment request, you go to the amendment form. And we ask that any applicants to please read and download the relevant data access sample access application form, and do note all the conditions and all the required supporting documents prior completing and returning the form. And especially for samples, we really like you to engage us via our cirodac@ccia.org.au email, so that we can advise you on sample availability, as to ensure that we can smoothly pass on all your requirements to our data access committee for review, instead of submitting a form, asking for all these contents or asking for all these resources, and then finding out that in fact we don't actually have what you need. And of course, make sure you do complete the form and return all the documentation to us. And please feel free to reach out to us via this CIRO-DAC inbox, and we'll endeavor to return all your inquiries in a timely manner. Next. Thanks. So, this slide that will be uploaded and shared in a later date. And so we've generated some QR codes for easy access, but for the purpose of this talk, I'll just focus on how to help you navigate through what our webpage will look like and how to actually get to the pages that you need. So our homepage, as you can see on this screen, can be accessed through those 2 links. And if you can see under researchers, there's the data and sample resources subtab. And if you've gone under that link, you basically see what you see on the screen here. So as you can see, there's now a section that will help you to navigate to the more specific requests, so including access to the data, sample, or amendment request. But also, next page, please, Mitali. But also the information about the data access committee meeting, as well as the round opening and close for each request rounds, as to help you plan your application ahead of time to make our cutoff. Because we do really want to commit to, the four-week turnaround time, so we ask that you ensure that all the documents have been collated and complete prior sending it to us, so that we can make sure it will make the round cutoff. And so on the homepage, you will find all the general information about the 02 trial, or the trials under the Zero program, as well as information about our data access policy and also our DAC committee charter, our DAC committee meeting dates, such as the screenshot here. And I note to you to please see the round closing date to ensure you make that cutoff. And again, being a clinical research program, we acknowledge that we do have clinical obligations to meet. So any data access or sample access requests from treating clinicians or patients that are justifiable for clinical purposes related to the 02 trial or other trial studies will be accepted out of this usual cycle. Thanks. And at the end of each of those web pages that I've introduced to you earlier, you'll see that there's a table for quick form downloads where you can directly download each of those forms, and also just a redirected link, so should you want to look more specifically about the information for each type of resource. So please feel free to explore our web pages once it's available. Next. So that's the process, and that's also how you apply. But now I'd like to just briefly walk you through the criteria in which our Data Access Committee will utilize to assess your applications. At the end of the day, what we really try to do is to enable, all the resources for research if possible. However, to meet all our obligations, we do have a set of criteria that's been developed under the guidelines of NHMRC, Genomic Australia, as well as J4GH, as mentioned, in our guiding principles, to really ensure that we do meet these expectations. So the first stage will be performed by the DAC operations, primarily to ensure that the forms are complete and that ethical permissions are granted to these projects. And also in the actual submission form, you'll find that there will be questions about the project details, any extra detail about how you're going to ensure that we will not violate some of the terms and conditions restricted to the data restrictions and sample restrictions, and how you're going to ensure that is the case. And once stage 1 is complete, we'll then forward these applications to our scientific review panel, consists of our voting members, and they will perform a project review based on these 6 criteria. These criteria are not to evaluate the scientific merit of your project, but rather to really understand the sample or the data requested is in fact matching the scope in which your project has been outlined, and that it makes sense to provide you with that data and sample to complete your project. Next, please. And so by the end of that is our 4th week, which is when our DAC monthly meeting happens. And at this stage is where the committee will meet to confirm outcomes and discuss any major issues that has been flagged for each application. These may include any applications that had raised queries in terms of its use and in terms of the data or sample use, or the nature of how suitable certain data sets might be, etc. So these are just rough examples. Next. So with all of that, the conclusion of basically this process is any requests to access zero data or samples for both research or clinical use must be submitted to the Zero Data Access Committee for review. However, ad hoc requests for zero data or samples for clinical purposes will be considered and expedited out of cycle as to fulfill our clinical obligations as the Zero program. But should you have any inquiries, or if you're uncertain whether your requests might cross over both, or there's any uncertainty about the nature of your request, please feel free to reach out to us at CCIA, this inbox, and we can discuss it and find out what's the best route of option for you to enable you to have access to this data for future research. Last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to an upcoming project that is led by our Zero Computational Biology team. They've been working really hard alongside us to generate a zero childhood cancer data portal, which is going to enable cohort level genomic data exploration, almost like a catalog to demonstrate to you the types of subjects under different types of under different cancer streams, and also to enable you to understand what sort of data or samples might be available within our zero data and sample resources repository. This is still in progress and it will be coming soon. I'm not going to steal the limelight here, and I ask you all to please keep an eye out for another communication that will come soon in the next quarter. And so with that, I would like to just finish up by really acknowledging the people and the tremendous work that really is into putting all of this together. You would think that putting together a policy and a committee is easy, but in fact, we did have a lot of help and consultation from various people. Firstly, thank you to the Zero leadership team in guiding the policy and charter development, also the National Study Committee and the Executive Committee for providing all the feedback and consultation. I must name our consultation with our legal team, our risk team, as well as our TSG team from Helen, Adriana, Shannon, and Emilia, who has been instrumental in ensuring that we are putting something together with truly reflect our legal responsibility as a program. Also acknowledged, big shout out to the computational biology team for the data portal development, which will be great help for us operationally in order to assist in identifying subjects to share the data and samples for. And also the big team behind the actual management and sharing of the data and samples, including CCI Tumor Bank SAM and our National Study Committee representatives and Research Committee representatives on our deck. I also want to acknowledge Tom, Yusuf, and Paul Wiggins, who has been really helpful in helping us update our Zero web pages with all the relevant new information with this new project. Of course, the genomic pipeline development, but most importantly is all the Zero teams across all the sites at CCI as well as at Koala for all the data sample collection, generation, and monitoring in which this program can function. And I promise this will be my last thanks, but thank you to especially to the patients and their families whom our program will not exist without, and the support of the Zero Network as well as the visionary funding partners. And with that, we'll be happy to receive any questions so that we can help you understand a bit more. Thanks.
Thank you, Angelica, and thank you, Mitali. I'm not going to waste any time here. We've got lots of time for questions. There are a number of questions in the chat, which I won't read out, but if I could ask Mitali or Angelica for you to read those questions and address them one by one, that would be great. I'm sure there are more questions from the floor, but I will firstly just reiterate that this has been a long and complex process to get to where we have today. We appreciate your patience. I know it has been frustrating for you at times, but I'm hopeful that this will be a much smoother process for everyone, that it will be better understood, and that you will see, obviously there is representation from around the country through the representatives from the study committee as well, which will ensure transparency as well in terms of releasing data. So a sincere thanks to the enormous amount of effort that's gone into this over many, 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 many months, and there's more to come. So questions, take it away, Mitali and Angelica.
Thanks, Ness. So I'll just flick through. So Far has questioned, what is the timeline from approval to agreement and the sharing process? This basically, Marie, if you could, once the DAC approval has been obtained, we notify our comp bio team to prepare the files for transfer. And typically, Marie, how long would that take?
Literally minutes, usually. So I think as long as we get the list of individuals that you want the data for, we generate a bunch of links that allows you to download, but you would have to complete the download within 7 days. That's just to do with the infrastructure that we've got. Yeah, and they limit it for security reasons.
Thanks.
Yeah, but we can
Charlie.
always regenerate it if you need more time.
Thanks, Marie. Charlie requested that I see in the request form charter there is a conflict of interest based on personal relationship with DAC member, but what about conflicts in field of research, say project or review? That is, if a request is for data and/or samples, that is also an area of active interest or might indeed be in direct competition for voting members, how will that be addressed?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So if you see the criteria that is been shared publicly, the criteria given to the scientific review committee does not actually cover any scientific merit-based requirements, but really is about whether your ask is appropriate based on your project. So whilst there might be a conflict of interest in terms of the field of research, but they should not be declining or rejecting or, rejecting any requests just because of that.
So maybe if I just add to that.
Yeah. Sorry, Ness, before I pass, if I could just add that for funded research, the assumption is by the committee that it's already gone through a round of interrogation and review. So it's not the committee's role to redo that. All we need to ensure is that the samples and data being requested aligns with the project targets, project goals. So yes, as Angelica said, the conflict of interest in the field should not be a factor in the assessment.
So just to add to that, importantly, if there is a similar or same project already underway that is known to the committee, then there are opportunities to link people up to collaborate. What we would, I think we would all agree we would want to avoid is duplicating efforts. So combining efforts rather than duplicating them independently would always be desirable, especially in such a small field with small numbers. Totally understand, and we've had instances already where we understand that because the pediatric oncology community is small, it's finite, we will see that. And so the immediate opportunity there is to suggest a collaboration, but it does not necessarily mean that it would be refused if the collaboration was not going to go ahead. it's also important to say that if somebody's got an idea and says, "Oh, well, I've got that idea as well," but if they're not already doing it, then that's not a reason to not provide access. So as both Mitali and Angelica said, it's not based on scientific merit, it's based on ensuring that the permitted use of the data is ensured and that the rights of both the patient and the rights of the researcher are balanced.
Thanks, Ness.
Can I just add some proof in the pudding statements on that in case you're even dubious? 2 recent data access requests directly overlap a funded grant that I hold, and they've received those data because that's the right thing to do. So just evidence of that in practice.
Thanks, Mark. Katja, do we get a reminder for the annual progress report? Yes, you will. And we'll try and keep it as simple as possible. Anushi, is same patient ID, sample ID is maintained for different research groups projects, or any second level of ID conversion is applied for each project? So if I've understood your question correctly, before we share the data, do we add another ID to sharing? And currently we don't do that. Bill, do you wanna?
So I think the recipient will only receive the public IDs.
Yeah.
They will not receive any internal IDs. So
The zero ID.
Yeah, zero ID. We don't have visibility on what other research groups might have to identify, that's a dangerous word, might use on the same subject, so we can't comment. And also, I guess adding to that too, it would be really beneficial if you do refer to our zero subject ID when in all your publications too, as to help us keep track of where these data and samples are being used in any of your output. But of course, this is a generous ask as a program and as custodian for the data.
Tally again, will the website also provide a list of approved requests, i.e. the CI and the project, for transparency so that new requests can quickly cross-check already approved requests? We've definitely discussed this, and we would like to publish the project registry in the future, given that we have permission from the applicants, of course, that they're happy for this to be made public. So that is also something that's in the works, Charlie. Katja again, are RNA whole genome sequencing data generated for the PDXs by researchers outside of Zero, also Zero data? And do we need to submit a data access form for these, or is this just for data of the samples themselves?
Yes, you absolutely have to submit a form for any data, not just data of the samples.
Just to clarify there, I think the question is...
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If it's generated outside of Zero, is Katja here? Katja, are you?
Yes.
Unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the question is, if the PDXs, so if the samples were from 0 patients, PDXs have been generated, but the sequencing of the PDXs has been done by the researchers, so that are not in 0. Is that data, like, for example, I think about the AML PDXs, for example, that Patrick has done a lot of sequencing on them. Is that data then 0 data, or is that Patrick's data?
So I think that's actually Patrick's data, because we've shared the samples with Patrick and he's generated the data on the back of his own research. So
or
that
we
would
might have shared the PDX with
we might have
Patrick, or Raylene might have created the PDX and whatnot, and then that sits with him. I can see
and that would
Raylene's
be
got her hand up.
direct collaboration there. Does that help, Touch?
I can make a comment. The way our PDXing stuff is done is they're considered derivatives of the primary samples, and the zero samples are the zero samples, and then anything from a cell line or from a PDX is a derivative of that sample, and it's covered under separate ethics, for at least on our end, and the way we do our preclinical work, which is, so there's definitely overlap in terms of they're a zero patient because they're enrolled in zero, but then there's a whole bunch of other work that happens. So for us, it's covered under a separate ethics and governance process. Still free, happy to share it, but it's just a different process. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is true. So all the zero data that we say are available are the ones that are generated through our current pipeline. So any additional, from PDXs in which the researchers have requested the PDX to subsequently generate all sorts of data that would belong to that other researcher.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Another, Raylene, do you want to shout out your question about prospective for samples for prospective samples? So is it possible to write a question that covers future samples as well as those already collected to avoid duplication of submissions as new patients are enrolled? So it's a tricky one because basically all the samples that we release must be tied to a specific research project. So as long as that is articulated and the DAC review committee endorse it, then I don't see any reason why not. It comes down to the rationale for the ask.
Yeah, and then can that be just like or it could be like a rapid amendment kind of thing. You just add another patient or something like that if it all fits within the guise of the project, rather than having to go through like a full review, just a consideration of the process.
And typically,
Bill.
Yeah.
Sorry, Bill, just before I throw to you.
That's how we deal with it currently. So amendments for any additional release of data or samples that are related to that project.
Yeah. And also for prospective, like for sample requests for prospective samples, potentially there's a collaboration potential there. So we would possibly look at getting a CRA in place or something just to, again, speed things up.
Thanks.
Yeah, there has to be that trigger that helps Marie know when to share it. And I think that's the trigger, isn't it? It's the amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jackie. Did you want to add something, Angelica?
No, I'm just trying to check which question.
You read, Jackie.
If we request zero team members to perform STR analysis using DNA as part of research collab, does this require both SAA and DAA or just SAA as data generated outside of clinical trial?
I'm sorry, I can't see that question.
So it's further down. The question I had was basically, we collaborate with Mark's team with our PDX models and the matched patient samples. There are situations where I understand STR is not routinely performed as part of Zero. However, it's really helpful for us to make sure that our PDXs are matching the patient samples and they're derived from the patient. In order to sort of preserve those samples, you obviously already extract DNA as part of the clinical trial. In order to access that to do STR profiling, if the samples aren't coming directly to us, if we're perhaps saying to Mark's team as part of the collaboration, can you send this off for STR and send us the data back? Is it just a sample access request, even though the samples aren't leaving CCI, or is it a data access request because they'll be collecting the data and then sending that to, does that make sense?
Kind of.
Do you mind we come back to you on that one?
Yeah. Okay.
I can shed a bit more light on that one, but that might need to go to Paulette because Paulette's the one that usually coordinates the sending of the STR samples for Jackie. So maybe we'll take that offline with Paulette.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll take that.
All right, thanks,
Jackie. And then your earlier question was, you noticed that the form contains a space for patient ID numbers. Can a data access agreement be set up to include access to all samples or in a specific disease category such as CNS or are forms patient-specific. The forms are not patient-specific.
Okay, great.
You can request the whole cohort for a specific tumor type. Again, it will come down to the actual rationale and justification. And I think a big challenge will be just the infrastructure required to house this depth of data. It's massive. So again,
Yeah, of course.
if the DAC committee are happy and satisfied that this will be done in a safe, secure way, then yes, the request can be put through.
Sure. Thanks.
No worries. Jamie, CDB in the DAC charter, personal relationship is just an example.
It's okay. Jamie just was saying the example. He's answered it for me, so no, I get that.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you.
I think the next one is
lots of
asking the agreement part. Does it mean the legal departments of both sides, Xero being CCI and requester will have to sign an agreement? Yeah, so it's a material transfer agreement. Is that correct, Angelica?
Yeah, so it will be CCI that signs the agreement, as well as the requester or the representative, authorized representative of their institution, of the institution.
Charlie, do you want to? This one is okay, or have a query or need to disclose?
Oh yeah, I was about the publication. I just noticed that you had to submit your publication 60 days before submission. I mean, we have a great legal team with lots of great forms to do those checklists. It's just that going to be, I can imagine an external person who's got the data from another university, say in Perth, like Raylene, and then she's like desperate to get her paper out, and then she's like, yes, because I got a grant handle, and then she's going to forget that because it's 60 days in advance, which is a lie. And I understand we've got obligations as part of that, but it's just like, wow, okay, that's another thing. So I'm just wondering how that will be like, how researchers will be reminded of that to ensure that, as it says, clause 5.2, that the integrity of the program is not, what do you call it? Damaged in any way. That was just the comment on that, and just open that to what people think about how that's going to play out in the real world. No offense, Helen, because I know that's. Yeah.
I mean, are there any thoughts on that from the floor? Obviously, this is something that we need to have in place to ensure our reputational, reputation protection. And 60 days in a research role, yeah, it's a lot, but I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that. And Helen, would you like to respond?
Sure. I did actually put a little answer to Charlie. The SAF and effectively pretty standard data transfer agreements and material transfer agreements, and these provisions around needing to share draft publications is pretty standard in most confidentiality data or material transfer agreements. So it's not an unusual obligation, but Charlie's right. It is hard to remember to do this, but it's right up there with the other obligations in the agreement. It's important that people remember that they can't share the data or samples with other researchers or entities without consent. They do need to let us see the publications. They need to only use the data and the samples for the purposes that were approved. They need to acknowledge Xero as part of this. So there's a raft of obligations in there which we would expect the recipients to take seriously and comply with. So not to sound heavy-handed about it, but it's not unusual within research to take these obligations. So, but we do rely on people acting in good faith to remember that.
Yeah. And Emily, thanks. That's a great suggestion to include a reminder in our monthly newsletters. At the moment, our newsletters are quarterly, but we may look into having some email prompts, as the rounds are closing. So that might, that's good. Thank you. Oh, any more questions?
A couple of hands up there, Mitali.
Yeah,
sorry, I can't see.
Jordan.
Jordan?
Can I just clarify? I might have missed something to Raylene's point. So if I'm doing a project on something rare, pineoblastoma, and I put in a data access request for the data around those tumors, tick boxes, whatever, put it in, it's approved. And all the data to that point is transferred. Are you saying I then have to put in another application, say in 6 months or a year, to get the further next data? Is there not a way to expedite that? It's already been approved. Like, could you not just have a box on the document that says pre-approved, seeking further, new cases? It just seems a bit laborious if you're having to put in a second document when it's the same approval, same project, same funding sources, presumably. I just want some clarity around that, because that's sounding like it's making it harder than it needs to be.
Sure. So if the a request is approved and it includes the release of prospective samples, we ask for the amendment just as a record of what's been shared out, because it's very important for us to be able to track that at that time, because obviously it will vary, and it won't go through a full review process. It will be bypassed and goes, be dealt with directly with the operations team. So it won't go back to the DAC if the approval still stands. So every request will have to have an endpoint. Anyway. So
okay, so if we put it in for, like, let's say I put one in today and I said through to the end of 25, but the data transfer could start like next week, I would just have to trigger to you to send the data rather than having to put in a form every time.
Well, the trigger is the form is the trigger, Jordan.
But so isn't that's a 13-page document? Like, is it just a tick on the box saying further application?
Can I answer this one? I think, yeah, so there is a specific amendment form precisely to lessen your burden. So the amendment form will be very specific to what are the extra data that you need. And you really need to quote to us, okay, this is a reference application. This is a reference for the application that was approved. And now under that same project, this is an extra data or samples that we need.
Separate form, smaller
separate form.
Got you. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. So it's not 13 pages, I promise you.
Yeah. It's the terms and conditions. Sorry, Helen.
Raylene, you did have your hand up.
In the interest of time, that's fine. I can address it later.
That's fine. I mean, if you have to run, but we're happy to take the question, Raylene.
No, that's good.
Okay, cool.
So we are at 11:01, well, 1 minute past the hour, wherever you all are, except Adelaide, 1 minute past the half hour. And so if there are more questions, which I'm sure there will be once you've digested this and once the slide deck is shared and you've digested that, the team will be very happy to take questions and address those and come back to you. I hope that this has helped to shed more light and clarity on the process, the new process that we'll be using moving forward. And then just before we wrap up, and thanks for your patience on this, and before we wrap up, just a reminder that that Xero's National Symposium is on the 8th and 9th of May, which is only about 5 or 6 weeks away, I think. No, it must be right. Anyway, about 5 or 6 weeks away. Early bird registration closes when, Angelica?
The 3rd of April.
End of next week.
Yeah,
end of next week. End of next week. So end of next week. So, talk to your current colleagues and encourage as many of you who are able to attend to register before the early bird closes. We're at 3 minutes past. Thanks again. Thank you very much to Angelica and to Mitali for pulling all of this together, and big thanks to everyone behind the scenes who has supported them in putting this presentation together today. So Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And we will see you next month.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks.